Proposing G, cheating on my husband's brother. As far as I have been able to find out, my addiction to sugar started before I was born. From the time I was conceived until I was born, my mom ate sweets that made up more than half of her calorie intake. It got even worse as a child. There was always candy and soft drinks in the house, donuts or sweet rolls for breakfast, and high-sugar desserts like baklava every night. I was very fortunate that sugar did not stunt my intellectual or physical development, for it is now known that sugar can do both. I probably avoided problems for 2 reasons. 1. We ate protein-rich foods like lentils and chicken every day, and I had a hamburger with tomato, lettuce, and onion for lunch every school day. And 2. I was very active, probably because of the high sugar levels, and played 3 different sports every year and was good enough at cross-country to run for my college team. When I was growing up, no one believed, although today most scientists consider it a fact, that sugar is as addictive as cocaine. I first realized my unusual connection to sugar when I was in middle school. I was eating a glazed donut when I experienced intense anxiety over a couple of tests I had to take the next day. To relieve the anxiety, I ate the entire box of donuts. The sugar addiction became so prominent that I could no longer help but struggle with it my freshman year of college after the cross-country season was over. I was a little homesick, especially for my high school friend with whom I began a loving relationship shortly after we each turned 18. And to cope, I resorted to sugary foods. No Twinkie, cupcake, caramel corn, or cherry Danish pie was safe with me around. Since I had a fast metabolism and was very active during cross-country, I didn't get fat, which in those days was the only sign of eating problems. After Thanksgiving, I got sick and had stomach problems and even had a fever. To alleviate the suffering, I ate candy bars. But I felt worse, not better. The summer after my first course, on the recommendation of my family therapist, I enrolled in a macrobiotic clinic. I was required to give up white flour, dairy, animal fats, caffeine, and sugar. In less than a week, I sneaked out to the local store several times to buy candy bars and caramel corn with the only money that wasn't confiscated when I signed up, and then stole some candy bars when I ran out of money. Eventually, I was found under a blanket for eating a payday candy bar and kicked out. "You're toxic," the psychologist at the rehab center told me. I flunked out of college. Fortunately, I was smart enough to keep up, though I should have been able to keep up more than I did. When I gave up cross-country running and started eating even more sugary foods in my junior year, I gained 25 pounds. The only place to turn to at the time was Overeaters Anonymous. That didn't help either, so I went back to regular exercise and lost 20 of my 25 pounds of excess weight. Somehow I graduated from college a year early and went to graduate school. I decided to study psychology to figure out what made me move. It was in grad school that I finally found the person who diagnosed my sugar problem. Surprisingly, it was a doctor at University Medical Center. Although it was far from a commonly accepted concept at the time, she showed me probably the first truly intelligent article on sugar addiction. I believed her. Unfortunately, by then I had developed what some psychologists, myself included, now call an addictive personality. When I went cold turkey, the craving for sugar had to be replaced by something. I've always liked sex, and who doesn't? First, I started looking through magazines. Then, with one of my dates, I went to a club. After going to the club, the only thing that could ease my craving for sweets was sex, with lots of different guys. However, the craving for sex made me less careful and more desperate, and I started having unprotected sex. I got pregnant, had an abortion, and it seemed like my life was spiraling out of control. I got lucky. Just like that, without any skill on my part, when a doctor at the University Health Clinic introduced me to Brian, another graduate student who had the same sugar addiction problem I had. The doctor didn't know that I had transferred my sugar addiction to a psychological sex addiction. Even today, no reputable scientist believes there is a physical sex addiction, except maybe one exception out of more than 1 million, and was now going back to sugar after a pregnancy scare. The guy was a decent-looking guy, and after we chatted a few times, They weren't dates, but therapy sessions. I told him how I'd dealt with my problem. His eyes widened. Interesting, Amy. I'm shooting at point-blank range due to the fact that I got scarlet fever as a child. If we were exclusive, we wouldn't have a chance of catching any disease, and we could deal with the sugar problem at the same time, Brian said. Then an interesting expression appeared on his face. I hope I didn't offend you. I put him out of his misery. You have your own apartment, don't you? I asked, stroking his arm. Yes, he answered cautiously. Let's go there and talk it over. We don't want anyone in the student union overhearing us. We were only in Brian's apartment for a few seconds before I started having sex with him. It turned out that both Brian and I were completely uninhibited. We'd given up sugar. I moved in with him as soon as the lease was up, and we were able to function like normal non-addicts as long as we had sex 6 days a week, sometimes multiple times a day. Although we had sex like rabbits, we never developed what you might call love, only mutual respect, and we were both never interested in marriage or anything close. Our therapy sessions continued until we both received our graduate degrees at the age of 25. By then, we thought we had overcome our sugar addiction, and as long as we had normal, regular sex, we could function normally. I don't know what happened to Brian, but that wasn't the case with me. Fortunately, shortly after I started, I met a guy who I thought I could have a lifelong relationship with. His name was Franklin. He was a lawyer. He was nice-looking, average height, intelligent and compassionate. I think I introduced sex into our relationship a little earlier than he would have thought appropriate, but he fell in love with me and I assured him that he was exclusive to me. Our relationship soon grew into love. Although the sex with Franklin was very good, he didn't really appreciate my sugar situation, even though I told him so. I never told him about my sex addiction to substitute sugar for me. So he unceremoniously ate sweets all over the house. Given my past, I began to feel the old sense of insatiability. I went off the deep end in terms of sugar consumption since it was available. I convinced myself that a balance between sex and sugar, neither one or the other, was perfectly acceptable, especially since I regularly attended a fitness club, so my optimal weight was only a few pounds over the norm. So I never sought help for what I eventually found out was the only thing that would ultimately help: psychotherapy. Franklin and I married just before my 27th birthday, when he was 28, and life seemed to be good. I worked in the field of psychology, but only as a teacher, not in a discipline that could really help me deal with my problems. After we had been married for 2 years, Franklin really wanted a child, and even though I knew it would cause me problems, I agreed and started on the pill. I quickly became pregnant, and once I was pregnant, I gave up sugar again. By then, I realized that my mother's sugar consumption during pregnancy was the likely cause of my addiction, and I certainly wasn't going to risk the same thing happening to my child. At first, the pregnancy hid my problem. However, in the 4th month of pregnancy, it began to make itself known. Franklin was unable to provide as much sex as I needed to overcome my sugar deficiency, both because of his natural libido and because he started treating me less sexually once I started gaining weight. I was starting to lose my mind, and one night when he was out of town on business and I ate half a dozen glazed donuts before I caught myself and induced vomiting, I knew I had to do something about it. Franklin had an older brother, Tom, actually a half-brother. Tom's father died when his mother was pregnant with him, but she remarried when Tom was only 9 months old. Tom lived nearby. Tom was married to Connie, a beautiful and intelligent woman, but more of a cold fish who definitely didn't want to have children. I also knew from conversations with Franklin's mom that Franklin had been breastfed when Tom was a 3-year-old toddler. I was also well aware from my psychology education that over 75% of boys, when their mother breastfeeds a sibling, 85% if it is a male sibling, develop a fantasy of wanting to have sex with a pregnant woman. The above facts, combined with my wonderful relationship with Tom, the appreciative looks he always bestowed upon me, even more appreciative now that I was pregnant, and his athletic body of 6 feet 5 inches and 220 pounds, Tom's father was much larger than Franklin, planted a seed in my brain that I couldn't shake. Just 2 days after the seed was planted, I had lunch with Tom, told him about my history of sugar addiction and the one thing that could replace it. I frankly proposed to him. Tom blushed, blabbed, then stammered, said a few compliments, but finally declared that he just couldn't do it with Franklin, no mention of Connie. When we parted, I promised him complete privacy and kissed him passionately while I inadvertently stroked his body. Tom didn't call, saying he'd changed his mind, and I was about to place an ad on Craigslist when a happy coincidence occurred. Franklin and Connie were going out of town on business Wednesday and Thursday next week. I called Tom and invited him to dinner on Wednesday. I promised not to bring up the subject we discussed at dinner, and I'll pick you up and we can go to a restaurant. Tom hesitated for a moment, but still said, "Okay, but we'll go to a Dutch restaurant. You won't have to buy me a treat." "Great, I'll pick you up at 6:30 on Wednesday night," I replied cheerfully, and ended the conversation with the most sultry bye I was capable of. Of course, I intended to have sex with Tom on Wednesday night. Although I intended to act more than talk, it was impossible to avoid the topic he and I had discussed at dinner. I deliberately arrived early, wearing only a raincoat and thigh-high boots. When he opened the door and said, "Hi, Amy, you're early, but I'm almost ready. Come on in," I did. I followed him into the bedroom where he retrieved his wallet and keys from the dresser and threw off his raincoat. When Tom turned to look at me, his eyes got bigger than baseballs, and he groaned, "Here's a dead end." "Please, Tom, you have to help me or I'll be a tramp. I swear no one will ever know," I muttered as I walked over to him, tucking my hair back on his shoulder, licking my lips and fumbling for his belt. "Oh no," he muttered, unceremoniously pulling my hands away from his body. "This may be your only chance to have sex with a pregnant woman, and I know you really want it," I said in my sexiest voice. And so it did. In less than a minute, we were on his bed having sex. We had sex non-stop all night. The morning after, I realized that he was a little guilty, but not guilty enough to pretend that we were going to do anything else Thursday night. After Thursday night, Tom was hooked. The last 2 nights have been the most fun I've ever had in my life. I don't know how you guessed I was having a pregnancy fantasy, but I am, and doing it with you is even more fun than my inflated expectations. Not only are you pregnant, but you're hot and you really know how to have sex. One would think you'd want to set a sex schedule, I grinned. "You bet I do," he growled and then kissed me. The next 3 months were the best of my life up to that point. I gave up sweets completely, I had sex with my careful, loving husband and attractive son-in-law, and I was glowing with pregnancy. A lot of the guys at work must have had little brothers too, because I was constantly being hit on, and while most of them were clearly good-natured, it was clear that for some of them, one word from me and it would be serious. Of course, all good things come to an end. Franklin got home earlier than I expected, and I foolishly left my computer open while I took a shower. Worse, it had an email open, inviting Tom to come over 2 days later at noon to have more quality sex with me. The only upside was that Tom and I never used our names or any data by which we could be identified, and the email address to which I sent his messages had been created by me for him and had a name that would logically never be associated with him. Franklin was unusually quiet when I caught him at home. The computer lid was closed, but I know he saw it, and probably the history of my emails from that address, all of which were of a love nature. He didn't confront me, but I knew there was no way out. I was sure Franklin would be watching what was going on, and canceling the meeting would result in him hiring a private investigator. And even if I didn't have sex with Tom again, he would eventually confront me. The last thing I wanted was for him to find out that Tom was my lover. That night, I called Tom on the landline, gave him the bad news, told him we needed to cool off, and advised him to handle the situation in a unique way that would only bring the problem on my head and not his. Jack, one of the guys at work who had been hitting on me, and apparently the most serious of them all, was a young bachelor. The next morning, I went back to my office to talk to him face to face. I explained the situation to him, without details or names, of course, and asked if he would agree to have sex with me the next day at noon, knowing that my husband would find us. "Won't he be rowdy?" asked Jack. The question struck me as a bit odd, since Jack was 3 inches taller and 30 pounds heavier than my husband, though I realized later that he had never met my husband and didn't know if he had a gun. "No, and I can protect you if I need to, because he would never hurt me. And he doesn't have a gun. He'll just get upset and maybe divorce me, but I'll have to suffer the consequences. Besides, my bedroom has 2 exits." Jack smiled. "Okay, on 2 conditions. 1, I'll sleep with you tonight, and 2, we don't have to be in the middle of sex when he finds us." I had no choice but to agree. "Okay," I replied after a short pause. "But you have to pay for the motel room with a credit card, and I'll reimburse you in cash." "I don't need reimbursement," he grinned. "I'm checking the number 1 box on my wish list." "You're too young to have a wish list," I replied, since Jack was no more than 25. "Then call it my fantasy list. Either way, I want to have sex with an already well-pregnant woman," he cackled. Jack took the day off, and we met at a local motel around 12:30. I felt guilty, but I didn't think I had a choice because I certainly couldn't risk Tom being exposed as my paramour. The 3 hours I spent with Jack turned out to be a wonderful, loving experience. When we left, I was exhausted but very satisfied, and he was beyond happy. "That was the best experience of my life, sexual or otherwise," he chuckled before we walked out. "Don't forget, you have to be at my house by noon tomorrow," I reminded him. "After today, you can be sure I'll keep my promise," he grinned. Things with Franklin were strained that night, but I tried to pretend they weren't. I cried when he left for work the next morning with only a token kiss on my cheek. I really did love Franklin, and even though I knew that what had happened was more my addiction's fault than my own, I still realized that I had screwed up big time and that it could ruin my life, and his. Jack arrived on time. It wasn't easy making love while staying clothed, but I held up well. Franklin showed up just when I thought he would. He yelled to Jack to get away, which Jack did. Luckily, it was easy because of the 2 exits, while making sure Franklin didn't reach for his gun. I didn't start trying to cover myself. I did, however, start crying. "I'm so sorry, Franklin. You deserve so much better than a drug addict like me," I blurted out through my tears. Franklin didn't fly into a rage, but he was clearly very hurt. He wanted to spill out. "Is the baby even mine?" he muttered. "I've never had sex with anyone but you during our marriage, except when I got pregnant," I replied contritely. "We can do a DNA test to prove it. It's not an excuse, but giving up sugar led to sex addiction, and Jack just happened to be around." "Is there anyone else?" he growled. "No, just Jack, and maybe a dozen times with him," I mumbled back, dropping my eyes to the floor. "Did he use protection?" was the next question. "No, but he's been tested and he doesn't have an STD, I answered quickly, not looking up again. "I have a client meeting this afternoon that I can't miss," he said, crossing his arms and looking at me with simultaneously tearful and angry eyes. "I'll talk to you at 6 this evening." "Okay," I replied softly. That night, I tearfully told Franklin all about my addictions from my teenage years and how I dealt with them. I didn't ask for him to consider them as excuses. I just wanted him to understand them enough to hopefully be able to forgive me. "We'll see," he muttered. "I'll sleep in the guest room until I make a decision. Things are already stressful enough when you're in the final weeks of pregnancy, not to mention your husband just exposed you as a cheater, and you're wondering if you'll have a 2-parent family when the baby is born." Thankfully, Franklin talked to his older brother Tom about his concerns, swearing him to secrecy. Although Tom was uncomfortable talking to Franklin about it, since Tom had sex with me dozens of times, he genuinely thought he was giving the most unbiased and best advice he could when he told Franklin that he needed to wait a few months after the baby was born before making any decisions. I know because Tom and I talked about it several times on the phone. I gave birth to a healthy, happy, bouncing baby girl, weighing 7 pounds, 6 ounces, 18 days after Franklin confirmed my infidelity. The hustle, bustle, and midnight feedings — I was nursing baby Emily Rose, Franklin's and my mother's middle name — that Franklin had gotten up for to bring Emily to me had made my cheating backfire. But it reared its ugly head again when Emily was 3 months old and I talked about going back to work. "Doesn't that asshole Jack work at the same place you're on maternity leave now?" asked Franklin rhetorically. "Yeah," I had to answer. "I don't want you to go back there. If you can assure me that you've forgiven me and that you'll stick around, I'll quit and get another job or even stay home if we can afford it," I replied. "I can't promise you that," he said and walked out. That evening, when I returned from my first day of work after maternity leave, we had a nanny who brought Emily to me for her midday feedings. Franklin informed me that he couldn't forgive me and wanted a divorce. I cried, but nodded my head. "If you have any sense, I'll agree to anything," I told him. We quickly came to an amicable agreement. We sold the house, split the proceeds, and bought a small house each. Me near my job, him near his, but only 4 miles apart. He paid half of the nanny's salary and was responsible for Emily's college fund and daycare until Emily was old enough to not need it. I was responsible for all other expenses. He had extensive visitation rights, including at least every weekend, and with a nanny if he and she were in agreement. There was no alimony. All property except the house was split 50-50. When I went back to work, we had a new department head. I brought her up to speed, especially about my addictions. She recommended a female therapist she had gone to graduate school with. I was apprehensive but felt I had nothing to lose, so I started seeing her. I wish I could say that therapy worked wonders, and eventually it did. However, there was a period of about 6 months when I was still off sugar, so Emily wouldn't get full of it while nursing, and needed sex. Even though I was no longer pregnant, Jack volunteered to fulfill that role. I gratefully agreed, just as long as he understood that it wouldn't lead to a permanent relationship. "We'll date each other until there's someone else for one or both of us," he replied with a cheesy grin. He was a great partner, but I never felt love for him. During and after the divorce, I was as nice and friendly to Franklin and his family as I could be. I threw several events, a birthday party at 6 months, 9 months, etc., for Emily, and invited not only Franklin but Tom, Connie, Tom, and Franklin's parents. Franklin's father, of course, was Tom's stepfather. Everyone came, and everyone was pleasant except Connie. I noticed the tension between Connie and Tom. After the first episode, I called Tom, but he didn't want to talk about it. After the second episode, Emily's 9-month birthday party, he called me. "I'm at a loss as to what to do about Connie," he admitted. "Although I still have feelings for her, her attitude about a lot of things really annoys me, and the fact that she not only doesn't want kids, but doesn't even want to be around them just upsets me." I consoled myself with him for half an hour. As we were about to sign, I made a flippant, maybe Freudian, but not flippant, remark. "Well, if you ever divorce her, keep me in mind. I'll bear you as many children as you want, knowing how well you'll love me when I'm pregnant." I regretted it as soon as I said it. I was sweating when the phone went silent. "Are you serious?" asked Tom finally. After a pregnant pause, I stammered. "I said it as a joke. But on second thought, it's not a joke. I really, really like you. But that's impossible since Franklin would go into a rage." "You've given me a lot to think about. Bye," Tom replied, and immediately hung up. A lot happened over the next 9 months. Therapy really worked, and like a recovering alcoholic, I was free of sugar and sex addiction when Emily turned 18 months old. As gently as possible, I ended my relationship with Jack. While I went to therapy, I regularly had lunch or dinner with Tom, and he joined Franklin, their mom, my mom, and me on an outing to the zoo with Emily when she was 16 months old. Shortly after that hike, he announced to the family that he was divorcing Connie. I wasn't surprised, but pretended to be. Once Connie and Tom were legally separated, they had already sold the house and moved into their short-term rental apartments, and the divorce was just a formality. He came to see me on Saturday afternoon. He bluntly said, "Amy, I've always had feelings for you, and our lovemaking experience while you were pregnant was the best time of my life. I want to try to have a real romantic relationship with you." "What about Franklin?" I asked. "I'll convince him that it will only help his situation, especially when it comes to visitation. But I'm not going to talk to him until I know you're interested." A caustic smile appeared on my face. "Your favorite niece is napping. Do you want a nonverbal answer to your question?" I teased, pressing my lips against his and stroking his body. We were having very active, even athletic sex. As we lay next to each other, panting, I asked, "Was it as good as it was when you were pregnant?" He smiled broadly. "Physically even better, although emotionally nothing, and I mean nothing, can beat sex when you were pregnant. Of course, I plan to make sure you get pregnant again," he hummed. We probably would have kept having sex, but we heard Emily stir and call out, "Mommy, Mommy!" So we quickly got dressed. Emily was very happy to see UT, as she called her Uncle Tom. Tom didn't let the grass grow under his feet. The very next day, he went to Franklin's house. Franklin was dating a woman named Gretchen, with whom he was in a serious relationship, and Emily liked her and got along with her. I tried to be polite to Gretchen all 3 times I dated her and made sure it wasn't awkward when she was around. I don't know if it was the fact that Tom is a super salesman, Franklin's relationship with Gretchen, my consistently pleasant and cooperative demeanor around Franklin and/or Gretchen, or all of the above, but Tom called me on my cell phone that Sunday night. "I'm sure Franklin is fine with it," he purred. "I lied when I said I hadn't talked to you about courting yet, but I thought you'd be receptive if he gave the okay. He wants us to come over tonight. Please say okay when he calls." "Will do," I replied excitedly. At that moment, my landline phone rang. "That's probably him calling now. Hope to see you soon," I said, ending the call. "Hi, Franklin," I said in a cheerful voice, picking up the phone and making sure from the caller ID that it was him. "Hi, Amy. How's our girl doing?" She was just telling me today, as much as possible with her current vocabulary, that you, me, grandmas, and UT are taking her to the zoo again this week. I bet you didn't know that. "I'm glad she liked it," Franklin laughed. "Now that I know Emily is doing well, let me ask you something else. Would you mind if your brother Emily and I came over to your place tonight to talk about something of mutual interest?" After a pause, I laughed. "That sounds mysterious." "Sure, come over, but give me an hour to clean the house so I don't have toys and junk lying around everywhere." "No slacking off, but how about right after you put Emily to bed at 8:30? "Wow, Franklin, you've awakened my curiosity. Are you and Tom coming to see me without Emily?" "Okay, I'll see you at 8:45, I replied. I put Emily to bed a little early, and Tom and Franklin arrived together right on time. I offered them each a glass of wine, which they accepted, and we sat down together at the kitchen table. "I can't stand the tension. Spill it, dudes," I grinned as an awkward silence prevailed. Franklin nodded to Tom to go first. I had to hand it to Tom. He acted wary and respectful, as if he didn't know what my reaction would be. "Well, you know that one of the reasons Connie and I broke up was because she didn't want or even like kids. On the other hand, you're a great mom." "Thank you," I interrupted with a smile. "Don't interrupt, I'm on a roll," Tom laughed. "Anyway, I've always liked you as a person, and to be honest, it's really embarrassing. I thought you were the most attractive daughter-in-law in history, and now that you're divorced, I was wondering if we have a chance at a romantic relationship." I feigned surprise. Then I looked directly at Franklin. "What do you have to say about that?" Wouldn't it be uncomfortable for you? Tom and I have talked about it at length and brought Gretchen into the conversation. I have no objections to it. If it works out, I think it will only make it easier to raise Emily together. Our family will be even stronger. Of course, I have no idea what your feelings are for Tom, but I'll be the last person to get in the way. I feigned thoughtfulness. This is new to me. I've always liked you, Tom, and there's no doubt you're handsome. But let me think about it. That's fair enough, Tom and Franklin said in unison. If I think it's a good idea, I'll call you and ask you to dinner. If you don't hear back from me, you'll know that I think it's a bad idea. Is that a good plan? It would save my ego not to get rejected personally if you have no interest, Tom grinned nervously. We chatted about work and business in general for another 20 minutes, and then they left. I muttered, "Call me," to Tom, when Franklin could no longer see. Tom called me as soon as he dropped Franklin off. When I saw his cell phone number on the caller ID, I answered the call. "You're a genius. I told you I thought I could work things out. Can I come over tonight to celebrate?" "You are so bad," I grinned. "I won't do anything to encourage you, but if my front door is somehow left unlocked and you sneak in, I don't know how I can fight you off without waking Emily." I giggled, and then hung up. I waited in bed with no clothes on. Tom didn't disappoint. He had sex with me that night and the next morning. We only had to wait 2 months before Tom gave up the lease and moved in with me. We thought others would think it was suspicious if it was less than 2 months. Tom and I were married in a simple civil ceremony 3 months after his divorce became final. It's now 6 years later, and I've been sober, sugar-free and love-free, except for Tom, for 7 years. I still go to psychotherapy sessions every 3 months to make sure I don't relapse. One of the reasons I'm confident I won't snap is that, unlike the Franklin situation, Tom is very supportive of the lack of sugar in the house. I hope Emily doesn't snap when she leaves home, because the poor girl has hardly ever had a cupcake, donut, soft drink, or sugary cereal in her life. Tom and I have 2 children, boys ages 4 and 2. I quit my job and became a stay-at-home mom, and I love it. Tom made love to me almost every day when I was pregnant. I'm head over heels in love with Tom. Sometimes I feel guilty that I love him so much more than Franklin or anyone else. Our relationship with Franklin and Gretchen, who married a year after Tom and me, and their little daughter Jessica, couldn't be better. There's virtually no tension at family gatherings, no difficulty with visitation. It's almost joint custody, but without all the problems that are often associated with joint custody. As long as I can stay afloat, I expect to have a wonderful life, and I am doing everything in my power to make sure my children never become addicts. The end! Subscribe to my channel. Thank you!